Welcome back to Cheating Stories Hub. Thank you for tuning in. We appreciate each one of you. Before we dive into today's compelling story, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. Now, let's get into this tale of betrayal, cunning strategy, and ultimate triumph. It started on an otherwise unremarkable evening. Daniel Grayson, was at work late, testing the new security system I'd recently installed at home. It was a cutting-edge piece of technology, complete with crystal-clear video and audio capabilities. For days, I had been fine-tuning its features, syncing it to my phone, and tweaking its settings. That night, I finally found a moment to test the live feed. The system's sensitivity was incredible. It picked up even the faintest sounds, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of floorboards. Curious to see how well it performed, I tapped into the app on my phone. Initially, all I heard were the usual ambient noises. But then, voices filtered through. I recognized one immediately. It was my wife, Emily. She was in the living room, talking on the phone. Her voice was calm, almost casual, but there was something in her tone that made me pause. I turned up the volume, leaning closer to the screen. "He has no idea," Emily said, her voice laced with amusement. My stomach dropped. Was she talking about me? I strained to hear more, my pulse quickening. The voice on the other end of the call was muffled, but Emily's laugh cut through, sharp and unsettling. "No, Miles," she continued. "He's too wrapped up in his work to notice anything." Her words were a slap to the face. Miles? Who was Miles? My thoughts spiraled, desperate for a rational explanation. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe I was overreacting. But then, her tone shifted. The laughter faded, replaced by something colder, more deliberate. "Okay, hold on," she said briskly. "Let me call you back." I heard her hang up and dial another number. My heart pounded as the audio picked up again. This time, her voice was sharp and professional. "Yes, I've made my decision," she said. "We'll move forward with the plan." Plan? What plan? My mind raced, piecing together fragments of a puzzle I hadn't even known existed. "Once we pin this on Daniel," Emily continued, her voice chillingly calm, "I'll get the kids, the house, and everything else. He won't see it coming." I froze, the phone trembling in my hand. This wasn't just betrayal, it was a calculated plot to destroy me. My jaw tightened as I listened, helpless to stop the words pouring from her mouth. "No," she said after a pause. "It won't be a problem. Miles has everything lined up. All we need is for Daniel to stay predictable, and he always is." Miles. That name hit me like a bullet. Miles was her coworker. The one she had always dismissed as a harmless friend. The one I had questioned once, only to be met with laughter and reassurances. Hearing his name now, in this context, made my blood run cold. Emily's laugh echoed again, dripping with confidence. "He'll never see it coming." I sat there, paralyzed by her words. This wasn't just infidelity, it was a meticulously planned betrayal. The signs had been there all along, but I had ignored them, dismissing them as quirks or misunderstandings. Now, in hindsight, they were glaringly obvious. The changes had started months ago. Emily began spending long hours in the backyard, pacing with her phone pressed to her ear. When I asked, she'd say she was catching up with old friends. But the calls were oddly secretive. Her laughter would drift through the open window, light and carefree, but occasionally, I caught fragments of her words. Once, I distinctly heard her say, "He's so oblivious." When I asked her about it later, she brushed it off with a smile. "Just girl talk," she'd said. I didn't press further. Why would I? I trusted her. But then, the arguments began. At first, they were over trivial things, misplaced car keys, groceries left on the counter. But they escalated quickly. Her tone became sharper, her words more cutting. I remember one particular argument, over taking out the trash, that turned into a full-blown shouting match. She called me lazy and unreliable. At the time, I chalked it up to stress. Now, I wasn't so sure. Her anger felt rehearsed, her outbursts calculated. She seemed to be cataloging my every word, my every reaction, as if building a case against me. And then there were the smaller, subtler changes. She changed the password on her phone, insisted on handling all the bills herself, and cancelled plans last minute with vague excuses. At the time, I had seen them as signs of her needing space. Now, they felt like pieces of a larger, more sinister plan. That night, after hearing her conversation, I couldn't sleep. Her words played on a loop in my mind, he'll never see it coming. I replayed every moment of the past few months, every fight, every odd behavior. The puzzle pieces began to fit together, forming a picture I didn't want to see. By the next morning, I had resolved to find the truth. When Emily grabbed her keys and said she was meeting a friend, I made a decision. I would follow her. I waited a few minutes after she left, then grabbed my keys and tailed her car. My palms were slick with sweat as I maneuvered through the streets, keeping a safe distance. She drove out of our neighborhood, taking turns that led to the wealthier part of town. The houses grew larger, the driveways longer. Finally, she slowed near a sprawling estate surrounded by high hedges and an iron gate. I parked down the street, my heart pounding. She pulled into the driveway, the gate sliding open to let her in. I crept closer on foot, staying hidden in the shadows. Through the slats of the gate, I saw them. Emily and Miles stood near the entrance, bathed in the warm glow of the porch light. Emily was laughing, her arm draped casually over his shoulder. His hand rested possessively on her waist. Their body language was unmistakable. I crouched behind a hedge, straining to hear them. Their voices were low, but I caught fragments of their conversation. "When this is over," Emily said, her voice trailing off into a giggle. Miles' response was quieter, but his tone was serious. "We need to move faster. I don't want this dragging out." My stomach churned. What were they talking about? What was this? I stayed hidden, watching as they disappeared into the house. My mind reeled. Whatever they were planning, it was bigger than I had imagined. And I wasn't sure I was ready for what I might uncover next. Underscore 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 underscore. That night, at dinner, I couldn't keep it to myself any longer. The kids chatted about their day, oblivious to the tension building inside me. Emily sat across from me, smiling as if nothing had changed. "Emily," I said, my voice calm but firm. She looked up from her plate, her fork mid-air. "What?" she asked, her tone neutral. "I know about Miles," I said. My words landed like a thunderclap. The kids froze, their eyes darting between us. Emily's hand paused, her fork hovering for a moment before she set it down. "I'm sorry, what?" she asked, her voice deceptively calm. "Don't play dumb," I snapped, my anger bubbling to the surface. "I know about the calls, the meetings, the lies. I know everything." Her eyes narrowed, and to my shock, she smirked. "You're pathetic, Daniel," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You think anyone's going to believe you?" Our daughter's voice trembled as she whispered, "Mom." But Emily didn't even glance at her. She locked eyes with me, daring me to push further. "This isn't about believing," I shot back. It's about the truth. About what you've been doing behind my back. Emily laughed, a cold, bitter sound. The truth, she scoffed. Oh, please. You're just paranoid. Her deflection only fueled my anger. I saw you, I said, my voice shaking. At his house. Laughing. Talking about moving faster. What the hell are you planning? She rolled her eyes, her smirk never faltering. You don't know what you're talking about, she said dismissively. And even if you did, who's going to believe you? Me, the loving wife and mother? Or you, the paranoid lunatic? The kids stared at us, their wide eyes filled with fear and confusion. My daughter looked like she was on the verge of tears, while my son gripped his fork tightly. I slammed my fist on the table. Enough! I shouted. The plates rattled, and the kids flinched. But Emily didn't even blink. She leaned forward, her smirk fading into something darker. You're out of your depth, Daniel, she said quietly, her voice dripping with malice. Keep pushing, and you'll regret it. Her words weren't just a warning, they were a threat. And in that moment, I realized just how far she was willing to go. The next morning, the tension in the house was unbearable. Emily acted as if nothing had happened the night before, chatting with the kids at breakfast and scrolling through her phone. But her smiles didn't reach her eyes, and her every glance at me felt calculated, like she was already planning her next move. I kept my own distance, pretending to be engrossed in the news while my mind raced. By the time she left for work, muttering something about an early meeting, I knew I had to act. Her words from the previous night still echoed in my mind, keep pushing, and you'll regret it. She had declared war, and I needed to prepare for the fallout. I started by combing through our shared finances. For years, we had managed everything jointly, but over the past several months, Emily had taken more control. As I scrolled through statements and bills, a pattern began to emerge. Charges for expensive dinners at restaurants I'd never heard of, payments for gifts I'd never seen, and cash withdrawals that didn't match our household expenses. My stomach churned as the evidence mounted. She wasn't just plotting to destroy me, she was already siphoning away pieces of our life. Then there was her phone. While she was at work, I tried guessing the password she had changed months ago. It took several attempts, but I finally cracked it, our anniversary date. I scrolled through her messages, heart pounding with each swipe. Most were innocuous conversations with friends and coworkers, but then I found the messages with Miles. They weren't overtly incriminating, but the tone was clear. Late-night texts filled with inside jokes, plans for meetings, and messages like, I can't wait for this to all be over. It was enough to confirm everything I had suspected. My hands shook as I took screenshots and emailed them to myself for safekeeping. That evening, Emily came home, cheerful and composed. It was almost eerie how easily she slipped back into her role as the devoted wife and mother. She helped the kids with their homework, cooked dinner, and asked me about my day as if nothing was wrong. But beneath her facade, I could sense the tension. She was watching me, waiting for my next move. I decided to confront her again, this time armed with evidence. After the kids went to bed, I cornered her in the living room. Emily, I said, keeping my voice steady. We need to talk. She sighed, setting down her glass of wine. What now, Daniel? Another paranoid accusation? I know everything, I said, pulling out my phone and opening the screenshots. The texts, the withdrawals, the lies. It's all here. Her expression didn't falter. Instead, she leaned back, crossing her arms. And? What are you going to do about it? Her nonchalance stunned me. You're not even going to deny it? I asked, my voice rising. Deny what? She said, her tone mocking. That I've been unhappy for years? That you've been too busy with your gadgets and work to notice? Fine, I admit it. But if you think these little screenshots are going to save you, you're wrong. Save me from what? I asked, my chest tightening. She stood, towering over me despite her smaller frame. From me, she said, her voice icy. You think you can outmaneuver me? Think again, Daniel. I've been planning this for months. You have no idea what's coming. As she stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her, I realized just how far she was willing to go. This wasn't just about a failing marriage, it was a battle for control, and I wasn't sure I was ready for the war ahead. The breaking point came on a Friday evening. Emily returned home late, reeking of perfume that wasn't hers and with a look of smug satisfaction plastered across her face. She barely acknowledged me as she dropped her bag on the counter and poured herself a glass of wine. Late meeting? I asked, feigning nonchalance. She glanced at me over the rim of her glass, her lips curling into a sly smile. Something like that. Her arrogance was infuriating, but I kept my composure. I hope it went well, I said evenly, watching her closely. Oh, it did, she replied, her tone dripping with insinuation. That night, I reviewed the footage from the newly installed cameras. As I suspected, Emily had spent most of her evening with Miles. They had met at a secluded bar downtown, their interaction confirming the intimacy I had witnessed before. This time, though, they discussed their plan in detail. Miles assured her he had contacts who could fabricate evidence to portray me as unfit for custody. Once we file, it's only a matter of time, Miles had said, his voice low but clear on the recording. He doesn't stand a chance. Emily had laughed, raising her glass in a mock toast. To freedom. I stared at the screen, my anger boiling over. They were playing with my life, my children's lives. But now, I had everything I needed to dismantle their scheme. Underscore 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 underscore. The following Monday, I made my move. Amanda filed an emergency petition for custody, attaching the damning evidence I had gathered. The recordings, texts, and financial records painted a clear picture of Emily's deceit and malicious intent. Within hours, the court issued a temporary restraining order against her, barring her from contacting me or the children until the hearing. When Emily received the notice, she was livid. She stormed into the house that evening, her face contorted with rage. What the hell is this? She demanded, waving the court documents in my face. It's the truth, I said calmly. Something you've been avoiding for far too long. Her eyes narrowed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. You think this will stop me? You're pathetic, Daniel. You'll regret this. Maybe, I replied, holding her gaze. But at least now, the playing field is level. The custody hearing was a spectacle. Emily arrived with her lawyer, her demeanor oscillating between tearful victim and self-assured manipulator. She spun her web of lies, claiming I was controlling, emotionally abusive, and neglectful. But as Amanda presented our evidence, Emily's narrative unraveled. The recordings were the final blow. The courtroom fell silent as her voice played back, cold and calculated. Once we pin this on Daniel, I'll take the kids, the house, and everything else. He won't see it coming. Emily's face paled, her confidence evaporating. She stammered, attempting to dismiss the recordings as out of context, but the damage was already done. The judge leaned forward, his expression unreadable, as Emily's words filled the room. When the recording ended, a deafening silence hung in the air. Emily's lawyer, clearly unprepared for such damning evidence, fumbled with his papers, while Emily sat frozen, her face ashen. Amanda stood with calm authority. Your Honor, this recording demonstrates not only malicious intent but also a clear lack of regard for the well-being of the children involved. Mrs. Grayson was willing to manipulate and fabricate evidence to sever the relationship between Mr. Grayson and his children. This is not the behavior of someone acting in their best interests. Emily's lawyer tried to regain control. Your Honor, we contend that this recording has been taken out of context. Mrs. Grayson was under significant emotional distress. The judge raised his hand to silence him. I've heard enough, he said firmly. He turned to Emily, his gaze piercing. Mrs. Grayson, this court does not tolerate manipulation or deceit, especially when it involves the welfare of children. Your actions, as presented here, are deeply troubling. Emily opened her mouth to speak, but the judge continued. The evidence speaks for itself. Effective immediately, primary custody is awarded to Mr. Grayson. Furthermore, a review of Mrs. Grayson's fitness as a parent will be conducted before any future visitation rights are considered. The gavel came down with a sharp crack, signaling the end of the hearing. Emily slumped in her seat, her facade finally shattered. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as spectators processed the outcome. Amanda turned to me, offering a small, reassuring smile. I felt a rush of relief so profound it left me momentarily speechless. The aftermath of the hearing was swift and brutal. Emily, who had once charmed everyone around her, found herself isolated. News of the courtroom drama spread quickly, and the recording became a point of no return. Even her staunchest supporters couldn't defend her actions. Miles, her accomplice, was the first to abandon her. I later heard that he had moved to another city, hoping to distance himself from the scandal. Emily, however, had nowhere to hide. She attempted to salvage her reputation, but every move she made only further cemented the truth of her manipulative nature. For the kids and me, life slowly began to stabilize. I focused on creating a safe and supportive environment for them, ensuring they had the resources to process everything that had happened. Therapy sessions helped them open up, and over time, the tension and fear that had gripped our home began to dissipate. Months later, Emily made one final attempt to claw her way back into our lives. She showed up at the house unannounced, her appearance disheveled and her demeanor desperate. "Daniel, please," she said, standing on the porch as I blocked the doorway. "I just want to see the kids." I shook my head, keeping my tone firm but calm. "Emily, you know the court's decision. If you want to see them, you need to go through the proper channels." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I couldn't tell if they were genuine or another ploy. "I've lost everything," she whispered. "I just want to make things right." "You made your choices," I replied. "Now, you have to live with them." She stared at me for a long moment before turning and walking away, her shoulders slumped in defeat. As I closed the door, I felt a pang of sadness for the woman I had once loved, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of closure. The chapter with Emily was over. In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life. The kids and I developed a routine that was grounded in trust and open communication. We laughed more, talked more, and leaned on each other in ways we never had before. One evening, as we sat together watching a movie, my daughter turned to me and said, "Dad, I'm glad we're happy again." Her words brought tears to my eyes. "Me too," I said, pulling her into a hug. Through all the pain and betrayal, I had found a new sense of purpose and strength. I had learned to trust my instincts, to stand up for myself, and to fight for what truly mattered. Emily's actions had nearly destroyed me, but in the end, they only made me stronger. As I looked at my kids, I knew that the worst was behind us. For the first time in a long time, I felt hope for the future. The scars of the past would always be there, but they no longer defined us. Together, we were building something new, something unbreakable.